Welcome to Lore of the Rings, where we explore the secret paths of Middle-earth and share the stories Tolkien never told. Before we dive in, take a moment to tell us in the comments where you're tuning in from and whether this tale has found you by day or by night. There are places in Middle-earth where maps fail and memory falters. Places where the very air thickens with ancient power, where light itself hesitates at the threshold. Deep in the heart of the continent, beyond the misty mountains and the rushing waters of Anduin, lies such a place, a forest so vast that entire kingdoms could vanish beneath its canopy, so dark that even the bravest travelers whisper prayers before entering its shadow. Mirkwood. The name alone carries weight. It speaks of dimness and dread, of paths that twist back upon themselves, of eyes that watch from the undergrowth. But this forest was not always a realm of shadow. Once, in ages now faded into legend, it bore another name, Greenwood the Great, and its boughs rang with elvish song rather than the chittering of unseen horrors. What happened here? What force could corrupt an entire woodland, transforming paradise into nightmare? The answer lies buried deep, in roots that remember, in stones that witnessed, in the very soil that once drank starlight and now feeds on fear. Stand at the forest's edge, where the last rays of sunlight die against the wall of ancient trunks. Feel the temperature drop, the silence deepen. The forest exhales, and you understand, this is no mere collection of trees. This is a living entity, breathing with the accumulated years of ages, dreaming dark dreams that seep into the waking world. Inside, the trees grow so dense that their branches weave together overhead, creating a perpetual twilight even at noon. The undergrowth tangles thick and thorned, clutching at boots and cloaks. The air tastes of moisture and decay, of things growing and things rotting, the eternal cycle compressed into every breath. And everywhere, the sensation of being observed. This is where our story begins, not with heroes or battles, but with the forest itself. For Mirkwood is more than a setting, more than a backdrop for adventures. It is a character in its own right, with a history as deep and complex as any kingdom, with secrets that have shaped the fate of Middle-earth itself. The elves who dwell within its borders know this truth. They have watched the forest change, seen the creeping corruption advance year by year, shadow by shadow. They remember what was lost, what the forest once was, and they guard against what it might yet become. But even their sharp eyes cannot pierce every veil, cannot see into every hollow tree and forgotten dell. The forest keeps its own counsel, harbors its own mysteries, and some of those mysteries have teeth. Come then, step forward if you dare. The path ahead winds through shadow and story, through history and horror. We will trace the forest's transformation from paradise to prison, explore its hidden depths and terrible inhabitants. We will walk where even elves tread carefully, where spiders as large as ponies weave their webs, where enchantments linger in the very bark of trees. But be warned, the forest watches those who speak its secrets, and Mirkwood never forgets. The tale we are about to tell is drawn from the deepest wells of Tolkien's legendarium. From the Hobbit's harrowing journey to the Lord of the Rings, fleeting references, from the scholarly depths of unfinished tales to the mythic grandeur of the Silmarillion. Every word has been excavated from these sources, pieced together like fragments of a map, leading to a place that exists both on the page and in the shadowed corners of imagination. For this is more than lore. This is a journey into one of fantasy literature's most haunting creations, a forest that has terrified readers for generations, that has inspired countless imitators but never been truly equaled. Tolkien poured into Mirkwood his own deep love of the wild wood, his understanding of nature's dual nature as both nurturing and devouring, his sense that beneath the surface of the world lie depths that humanity was never meant to plumb. So we venture forward into the green darkness. The trees close behind us. The path grows dim, but the tale does not end there. It begins. Long before the shadow came, before corruption took root, there existed a woodland realm of such beauty that even the stars would pause in their courses to gaze down through its canopy. This was Greenwood the Great, Urin Galen in the Sindarin tongue, and it stretched from the borders of the Grey Mountains in the north to the edge of the Emin Dur Hills in the south, a sea of living green that covered the land like an emerald blanket. In those elder days, when the world was young and memory itself was being forged, the forest knew only light. Sunlight filtered through leaves of gold and green, dappling the forest floor in ever-shifting patterns. Moonlight silvered the clearings where deer would gather, their eyes reflecting the stars. The trees grew tall and proud, oaks that had witnessed the awakening of elves, beeches smooth-barked and wise, towering pines that whispered secrets to the wind. This was the forest of the First Age, untouched by the wars that raged to the west, preserved as if in amber while kingdoms rose and fell beyond its borders. The roots went deep here, deeper than memory, tapping into the very bones of the earth. And the forest grew, not with the wild, unchecked growth of later ages, but with purpose and pattern, as if guided by some intelligence older than time itself. The Sindar elves were the first to make their homes beneath these boughs. Coming east after the ruin of Beleriand, seeking sanctuary from the devastation that had swallowed their ancient homeland, they found in Greenwood a place that remembered the world as it was meant to be. They built no cities of stone here, raised no towers to pierce the sky. Instead, they shaped their dwellings from the living wood itself, coaxing trees to grow in patterns that formed halls and chambers, working with the forest rather than against it. These woodland elves were different from their kin who dwelt in Lindon, or who would later establish Rivendell and Lothlorien. They were wilder, more attuned to the rhythms of root and branch, more comfortable in shadow and silence. They moved through the forest like deer, like wolves, like the wind itself, part of the woodland rather than merely inhabitants of it. Rivers ran clear and cold through the forest in those days. The Forest River, greatest of them all, flowed from secret springs in the north, winding through the trees until it eventually joined the Great Anduin. Its waters were pure as mountain snow, and fish leaped in its currents, silver-scaled trout and great pikes that could feed a family for a week. Elves would gather on its banks in the twilight hours, singing songs that made the very water dance. The creatures of the forest knew no fear in those ages. Red deer and roe wandered freely, their paths well-worn through clearings carpeted with moss and wildflowers. Wolves howled in the distance, but their song was one of hunt and pack, not of corruption or madness. Bears shambled through the undergrowth, fishing in the streams, denning in hollow trees older than the hills. And everywhere, birds, thrushes and wrens, ravens and wood pigeons, their songs weaving through the canopy like threads of sound. By the Second Age, Greenwood the Great had become one of the last pristine wildernesses in Middle-earth. While kingdoms rose and fell, while the dark Lord Sauron forged his rings and waged his wars far to the south, the forest endured. It was as if the trees themselves formed a barrier against the changing world, a green fortress where the ancient ways persisted, where the music of the first days had not yet faded into silence. The elven King Orifer ruled here, establishing the woodland realm in the western reaches of the forest. His people grew numerous and strong, a hidden kingdom that few outsiders ever glimpsed. They traded little with the world beyond, preferring the company of trees to the politics of men and dwarves. They were guardians, though they might not have named themselves such, guardians of a way of life, of a connection to the earth that was rapidly disappearing from the wider world. Travelers who entered the forest in those days spoke of its beauty with tears in their eyes. They told of glades where sunlight pooled like liquid gold, of nights when fireflies danced in such numbers that the forest seemed to hold its own constellation of stars. They described trees so ancient that their trunks had grown broad as houses, their roots forming natural archways through which a man could walk upright. The forest was a place of power, yes, but it was a power that felt benevolent, nurturing, like the embrace of the earth itself. Yet even then, even in those golden days, there were places in the forest where the shadows gathered more thickly. There were dells where the trees grew twisted, where the undergrowth snarled itself into impenetrable walls. There were hollows where the air hung heavy and still, where animals would not venture and even elves quickened their pace. These were the seeds, perhaps, the places where, when darkness finally came seeking purchase, it would find soil ready to receive it. The forest was ancient. The forest was wise. The forest remembered things that should have been forgotten. And in the deep places, in the secret hollows where even starlight never reached, something waited. Not conscious, perhaps, not yet, but potential. The potential for darkness, for transformation, for the paradise to become prison. The elves sensed it, in the way that creatures attuned to the natural world sense coming storms. Orifer grew troubled in his later years, though he could not name the source of his unease. The trees themselves seemed to whisper warnings, though in no language that could be clearly understood. Something was changing, slowly, imperceptibly. A shift in the pattern, a discord in the eternal song. But the change was so gradual, so subtle that it could be dismissed as imagination, as the melancholy that sometimes overtook even the immortal elves. Life continued as it had for ages. The rivers ran clear. The deer wandered freely. The songs echoed through the canopy. Yet even in paradise, the seeds of shadow were sown. And seeds, given time and darkness, always find a way to grow. Darkness does not arrive as an invading army, banners flying and trumpets sounding. It comes as a whisper, a slight dimming of the light, a shadow at the corner of vision that vanishes when you turn to look directly at it. It comes as a change so gradual that each day seems no different from the last, until suddenly you wake to find that the world has transformed around you, and you cannot remember when or how the transformation began. This is how the shadow came to Greenwood. It began in the south, in a place the elves had long avoided without quite knowing why. There, on a rocky hill that rose from the forest floor like a broken tooth, stood ruins older than memory, remnants of some forgotten fortress from ages past, when different powers walked the earth. The hill was called Ammon Lank, the Naked Hill, for no trees would grow upon its summit, only twisted thorn bushes and sickly moss. Around the year 1000 of the Third Age, something came to that hill. Something that had dwelt in darkness far to the east, in the stronghold of Dal Guldur, or so it would come to be called. A presence settled over the ruins like a foul mist, and slowly, inexorably, that presence began to extend its influence into the surrounding forest. The changes were subtle at first. Trees near the hill began to sicken, their leaves turning brown before their time, their bark developing lesions that wept dark sap. Animals that wandered too close to the ruins were found dead, their eyes wide with terror, their bodies unmarked but somehow wrong. The air itself seemed to thicken, to take on a quality that made breathing difficult, that left a bitter taste on the tongue. But the elves paid little attention initially. The fortress hill had always been a place of ill omen. That its influence might extend slightly further seemed of little concern. The forest was vast. What did it matter if one small corner grew unwholesome? They did not yet understand that they were witnessing the first moves in a game of strategy that would span centuries. That the presence on the hill was no minor spirit or wandering wraith, but something far more terrible. The Dark Lord himself returned to Middle-earth in a new form, testing his strength, extending his reach, preparing for the long game of conquest that would nearly see the world fall into eternal darkness. Sauron had come to Mirkwood, and the forest would never be the same. The corruption spread like a disease, like roots of poison growing beneath the soil. Year by year, decade by decade, the shadow advanced. Trees that had stood proud for thousands of years began to twist, their trunks developing shapes that seemed almost deliberate, faces in the bark, grasping branch fingers, forms that in certain lights appeared disturbingly human. The undergrowth grew denser, more tangled, as if trying to trap unwary travelers in a net of thorns and vines. The creatures of the forest changed too. Wolves grew larger, more aggressive, their eyes gleaming with an intelligence that had nothing to do with natural animal cunning. They hunted in packs larger than ever before, and they no longer fled from fire or steel. They had tasted something, some essence of the shadow, and it had transformed them into something more than mere beasts, something touched by malice and purpose. But the wolves were nothing compared to what came after. Spiders had always dwelt in the forest, as they do in any woodland. Small things spinning their webs between branches, catching flies and beetles. Useful creatures, part of the natural order. But as the shadow deepened, the spiders began to change. They grew, and grew, and grew. Where they came from, these monsters, is a tale of its own, descended, perhaps, from the ancient brood of Ungoliant, the primordial darkness that had once sought to devour light itself. They found in Mirkwood's growing shadow a perfect breeding ground, and they multiplied with horrifying speed. Soon, spiders as large as dogs scuttled through the undergrowth. Then spiders as large as wolves. Then spiders whose bodies were the size of ponies, whose legs could span the width of a forest path, whose fangs could pierce armor. They wove their webs between the trees, great sheets of sticky silk that would catch and hold a man as easily as a fly. They lurked in the canopy, patient as stone, waiting for prey to pass beneath. And they were intelligent, far more intelligent than any natural spider should be. They spoke to one another in clicking, hissing voices. They planned. They hunted with strategy and coordination. The forest had become their larder, and everything within it was prey. The forest river, once clear as crystal, began to run dark, not with mud or silt, but with something else, a taint that had no name, that left a film on the stones and poisoned fish in their hundreds. Elves who had drunk from its waters for centuries learned to avoid it, to seek only the smaller streams that still ran clean, fed by springs too remote for the shadow to have reached. Yet, light itself seemed to fail. The canopy had always been thick, yes, but sunlight had found its way through in dappled patterns, creating clearings where wildflowers bloomed. Now the leaves grew so dense, so dark, that even at noon the forest floor lay in perpetual twilight. The sun became a memory, a rumor, something glimpsed only at the forest's edge. Inside, there was only the green darkness, pressing close on all sides, heavy as water. The elves retreated northward, abandoning their southern settlements, consolidating their realm in the northwestern reaches of the forest, where the shadow's influence was weakest. Thranduil, son of Orifer, now ruled the woodland realm, and his heart grew hard with the knowledge of what had been lost. He ordered great halls carved into the rock beneath the forest, creating an underground stronghold that could be defended against the horrors that now roamed the woods. His people adapted. They became more martial, more guarded. The songs they had once sung in the open air were now reserved for the safety of the halls. Patrols went out armed and armored, expecting battle. The easy communion with the forest that had characterized the earlier ages gave way to a more wary relationship, not trust but vigilance, not love but duty. The forest had become a battleground, every tree a potential hiding place for enemies, every shadow a threat. The elves endured, but the joy had gone out of their existence. They had become prison guards, maintaining watch over a realm that had transformed from paradise into nightmare. And still the shadow grew. Bats emerged from caves that had never before been known to exist, vast clouds of them that would darken the sky at dusk. They were not the small, harmless creatures of the outer world, but massive things with wingspans as wide as a man's outstretched arms, with teeth like needles and eyes that glowed with a sickly phosphorescence. They hunted in the twilight, their screeching cries echoing through the forest like the voices of the damned. Even the plants turned treacherous. Vines would coil around the ankles of those who passed, gripping with unexpected strength. Flowers bloomed that released spores, inducing hallucinations and madness. Mushrooms grew in spiral patterns that, if followed by eye, could trap the mind in endless loops of confusion. The forest itself had become an enemy, every element of it touched by the pervasive corruption. The paths that had once connected the northern and southern reaches of the forest became impassable, choked with undergrowth and haunted by such horrors that even the bravest elven warriors would not traverse them alone. The forest river, which had served as a highway through the woodland, became a barrier, its waters too poisoned to drink, its banks too tangled to navigate. Bridges rotted and fell. Landmarks were swallowed by the encroaching shadow. Travelers who entered the forest, and there were still some fool enough or desperate enough to attempt the crossing, rarely emerged. Those who did staggered out half-mad, babbling of visions and voices, of paths that looped back on themselves, of clearings where the remains of those who had come before lay scattered like abandoned toys. The forest had gained a reputation, and with that reputation came its new name. No longer Greenwood the Great. Now it was Tor Nu Fuin in the Sindarin tongue, the forest under nightshade. To men, it became known simply as Mirkwood, the murky wood, the place of darkness. And in Dal Guldur, in the fortress on the hill that had become a place of such evil that even speaking its name felt like a curse, the presence grew stronger. Sorcery emanated from that place, rolling through the forest like fog, seeping into every root and branch. The very stones seemed to absorb the malevolence until the land itself became corrupted. The elves sent scouts, of course. They needed to know what they faced, what power had taken root in the heart of their forest. But few who ventured close to Dal Guldur returned, and those who did brought back only fragments of intelligence, impressions of vast power, of ancient evil, of something that had walked the earth in the elder days and had now returned to finish work left undone. Thranduil fortified his realm. He closed his borders. The woodland realm became isolated, cut off from the wider world by the sea of shadow that now surrounded it. And he waited, as the elves are so good at waiting, hoping that the darkness would consume itself. That time would heal what evil had wounded. But time does not heal all wounds. Some wounds only deepen with the years. And in the heart of shadow, a power long thought dormant waited to rise, patient, calculating, preparing for the day when it would extend its reach beyond the forest, beyond the river, to encompass all of Middle-earth in its grasp. The shadow had descended, and Mirkwood would wear it like a shroud for 1,000 years. In the deep places of the north, where the shadow had not yet reached with full force, where starlight still occasionally pierced the canopy on cloudless nights, the woodland realm endured. Not thrived, those days were past, but endured with the grim determination that characterized the elves in this darkening age. King Thranduil ruled here, and his was a kingdom transformed by necessity into something his ancestors would barely have recognized. Gone were the open halls beneath the trees, the free movement through the forest, the easy trust in the woodland's benevolence. In their place stood, or rather, lay hidden, the great underground fortress of the Elven King's halls. These halls had been carved into the rock face of a hill overlooking the Forest River, in the northwestern reaches of the forest where the water still ran relatively clear. From the outside, little could be seen. A massive stone door, cleverly concealed, that opened onto the river. But within, the elves had created a realm of unexpected beauty, a refuge against the darkness that pressed close on every side. The halls extended deep into the living rock, a maze of corridors and chambers lit by lanterns that burned with a clear white light, fueled not by oil or wax, but by elven craft that drew illumination from the captured memory of starlight. The walls had been carved and shaped with such skill that the stone seemed to flow like water frozen in mid-cascade, forming pillars and arches of natural grace. In the great throne room, where Thranduil held court, enormous tree roots had broken through the ceiling, and rather than remove them, the elves had incorporated them into the design, so that living wood and stone merged in patterns that suggested the forest overhead. Here was beauty, yes, but it was the beauty of a fortress, of a sanctuary under siege. Every entrance was guarded, every corridor designed to be defended. The wooden doors were thick as a man's body, bound with bronze and spelled with enchantments that would burn the flesh of enemies who sought to force them. This was not a palace built in times of peace, but a stronghold prepared for a war that might last centuries. The elves who dwelt here had changed as surely as their home. They were still fair, still possessed of the grace and wisdom that marked their kind. But there was a hardness to them now, a vigilance that never ceased. They moved through the halls armed and armored, even in supposed safety. Their eyes held a wariness that came from centuries of living on the edge of shadow, of knowing that beyond their walls crawled horrors that would delight in their deaths. Thranduil himself embodied this transformation. Tall and proud, with hair the color of autumn leaves and eyes that could gleam like cold fire, he was both beautiful and terrible. A king who had watched his realm shrink year by year, who had lost too many of his people to the darkness, who had learned to make the hard choices that survival demanded. He wore a crown of red leaves and berries in autumn, of flowers in spring, still connected to the turning of the seasons, still bound to the forest despite everything it had become. But beneath that crown was a mind sharp as a blade, always calculating, always assessing threats. His people were fewer now than in the elder days. Many had departed over the centuries, choosing to leave Middle-earth entirely, to sail west to the undying lands where shadow could not reach. Others had fallen in the endless skirmishes with the creatures of darkness, taken by spiders, dragged down by wolves, lost in the twisted paths where even elven woodcraft could not find the way home. Those who remained were warriors and survivors, bound together by shared trauma and determined defiance. They lived by strict rules, these woodland elves. No one ventured into the forest alone. Patrols went out in groups of at least 5, armed with bows and blades, following routes that changed constantly to avoid ambush. They moved through the trees with incredible stealth, using the shadows as cover even as they fought against the shadow itself. They had learned to read the signs of spider passage, to recognize the markers wolves left for their packmates, to sense the subtle wrongness that indicated they were approaching places where the corruption ran deepest. Despite the danger, they could not abandon the forest entirely. This was their home, their charge, the land they had sworn to protect. So they maintained their vigilance, fighting an endless holding action against the encroaching darkness. They hunted the giant spiders with a cold fury, tracking the monsters to their lairs and putting entire nests to the torch. They ambushed wolf packs, thinned their numbers, made the forest as costly for the servants of shadow as it was for the elves themselves. It was bitter work, thankless work, but they persisted. The culture of the woodland realm reflected this reality. Their songs, once celebrations of beauty and joy, had become laments and war chants. Their festivals, once frequent and filled with laughter, grew rare and subdued. Even their crafts changed. They made more weapons now, more armor, more tools for survival rather than items of pure beauty. Practicality had become paramount, yet they did not surrender to despair entirely. Beauty still mattered to them. It had to, for beauty was part of what they fought to preserve, part of what made them elven rather than mere survivors. In the deepest halls, far from any possibility of intrusion, they maintained gardens unlike any in Middle-earth. Using their ancient knowledge, they coaxed plants to grow without sunlight, fed by magic and memory. Flowers bloomed in underground grottos, white and silver blossoms that glowed with their own radiance. Trees took root in soil brought from the surface, spreading their branches across stone ceilings. Water channeled from deep springs formed pools and fountains, and the sound of running water echoed through the halls like the voice of the forest as it once had been. In these hidden gardens, the elves could pretend for a moment that they dwelt still in Greenwood the Great. They could let down their guard, remember what had been lost, and find the strength to continue the fight. Thranduil himself would walk these gardens in the deep hours of night, when the weight of rule pressed most heavily upon him. He would touch the trees, speak to them in the ancient tongue, apologize for bringing them into this stone prison. And sometimes, it seemed, they would answer, a rustle of leaves though no wind blew, a sense of forgiveness and understanding. The trees knew. They had sacrificed their place under the sky so that some fragment of what had been might endure. They bore their captivity with more grace than many of the elves who tended them. The relationship between Thranduil's realm and the outside world was complicated. The elves traded with the men of Dale and Esgaroth, exchanging crafted goods and the rare wines they somehow still produced for the practical supplies they could not make in their underground halls, iron and grain and other necessities. But they were not friendly. Thranduil had grown suspicious of outsiders, had learned to trust little and reveal less. Those who dealt with the woodland elves found them cold, haughty, quick to take offense and slow to forgive. They did not understand. How could they? The constant pressure of living surrounded by evil, the slow grinding down of spirit that came from centuries of unrelenting vigilance. The elves had become isolationists by necessity. They guarded the borders of their territory jealously, allowing few to pass through, helping fewer still. When Thorin's company would one day pass through Mirkwood, seeking a path to the lonely mountain, they would find no welcome in the Elven King's halls, only suspicion and imprisonment. Thranduil had learned, through bitter experience, that those who entered the forest often brought trouble with them, and his people had troubles enough without taking on the burdens of others. Yet for all their hardness, all their suspicion, the woodland elves maintained one crucial quality: hope. They believed, however distantly, that the shadow would one day lift, that the forest would heal, that they would walk again under open sky without fear, would hear once more the songs that had faded into silence. It was this hope, more than any fortress or weapon, that sustained them through the dark years. They were the wardens of Mirkwood, the last defense against the shadow consuming everything. They held the line, year after year, century after century, against horrors that would have broken lesser peoples in a fraction of that time. They were proud, yes, proud and cold and often cruel in their judgments. But they had earned that pride through suffering and sacrifice, through simply refusing to yield when yielding would have been so much easier. And in the throne room, on his carved seat of pale wood, Thranduil kept watch. His scouts brought him reports of spider movements, wolf sightings, strange phenomena in the forest depths. He listened, calculated, gave orders, sent out patrols. His mind stretched across the forest like a web of his own, always sensing, always planning, always aware that vigilance was the price of survival. Even Thranduil's sharp eyes cannot see all that stirs in the forest's deep heart, but he sees enough. And what he sees tells him that the struggle is far from over, that darker days may yet come, that the shadow is patient and will wait as long as necessary for its chance to strike. So the woodland realm endures, a beacon of light in a sea of darkness, a defiant remnant of what once was and what might someday be again. Beautiful and terrible, proud and desperate, the elves of Mirkwood write their story in small victories and hard-won survivals. They are the last guardians, and they will not abandon their post, no matter how long the night may last. If the elves are the forest's guardians, then the creatures of darkness are its true inhabitants now, or so it seems to those who must traverse the shadowed paths. For Mirkwood has become a realm of nightmares given flesh, a bestiary of horrors that would seem fantastical if they were not so terrifyingly real. The spiders are the worst. Ask anyone who has survived passage through the forest, and they will speak first of the spiders, their voices dropping to hushed whispers, their eyes distant with remembered terror. These are not the spiders of garden and barn, useful creatures that catch flies and spin delicate webs. These are monsters from a darker age, carrying in their blood the echo of Ungoliant, the great spider who once sought to devour the light of creation itself. They are intelligent and malicious, driven by a hunger that goes beyond mere animal need into something more sinister, a desire not just to feed, but to inflict suffering, to trap and torment their prey before the final strike. A full-grown giant spider of Mirkwood stands taller than a pony, its body covered in bristling black hair that seems to absorb light rather than reflect it. 8 eyes gleam like coals in its head, arranged in a pattern that allows it to see in nearly all directions at once. Its legs, armored in chitinous segments, can span 15 feet or more, each tipped with a hooked claw capable of gripping bark, stone, or flesh with equal ease. The fangs are hollow, as long as daggers, dripping with venom that can paralyze a man in seconds and kill within minutes. But it is their intelligence that makes them truly terrible. They speak to one another, coordinating hunts, sharing information about prey. They set traps with the cunning of military strategists, webs placed not randomly, but at bottlenecks along known paths, in layers so that those who avoid the first snare stumble into the second. They can wait motionless for days, patient as stone, feeling through the vibrations in their webs when something has become entangled. And then they come, scuttling through the canopy or along the ground with horrifying speed, clicking and hissing in their twisted language. The webs themselves are marvels of dark engineering. Stronger than any rope crafted by human hands, sticky with a substance that clings and spreads, trying to wipe it off only results in more of you becoming stuck. The silk is pale in the green darkness, almost luminescent, forming sheets and curtains between the trees. Some areas of the forest are so thick with webbing that they appear to be draped in ghostly fabric, and the bones of the spiders' victims, deer, wolves, and sometimes larger things, dangle in wrapped bundles like obscene decorations. They nest in the deep forest, in places where even the residual daylight cannot reach, where the darkness is absolute. Here they lay their eggs in silk sacks the size of a man's torso, each containing hundreds of spiderlings. When these hatch, they devour one another until only the strongest remain, and these then venture out to claim their own hunting territories. The forest writhes with them in some seasons, young spiders no larger than cats scuttling everywhere, learning to hunt, to kill, to hate anything that moves with warm blood in its veins. The elves hunt the spiders relentlessly, but for every nest destroyed, 3 more are found. The creatures breed too quickly, spread too far. They are a plague upon the forest, an infestation that cannot be fully exterminated, only contained. And they grow bolder each year, venturing closer to the northern borders, testing the elven defenses, probing for weakness. But the spiders are not the only horrors that stalk Mirkwood's shadows. The wolves of the forest have been touched by darkness as surely as the land itself. Once they were natural creatures, hunting to survive, maintaining the balance of the woodland. Now they are something else, larger, more savage, possessed of a malign intelligence that has nothing to do with ordinary animal cunning. Their eyes shine red in the twilight, and they move in packs of 20 or 30, coordinating their attacks with eerie precision. These are not the wolves that flee from fire. They have learned to circle those who try to ward them off with flames, to wait until the wood burns low, then strike from multiple directions at once. They seem to understand tactics, to remember patterns. Travelers who survive one wolf attack and use the same defensive strategy a second time often do not survive. The wolves learn, adapt, come at them differently. Their howls echo through the forest at night, long and mournful, yet somehow filled with mockery. It is a sound that carries for miles, that seems to come from all directions at once, that raises the hair on the back of the neck and sends primitive messages of fear straight to the brain stem. Those howls serve multiple purposes: communication within the pack, coordination of hunts, and psychological warfare against prey. Many who have died in Mirkwood did so not from wounds, but from the terror-induced exhaustion that came from nights of hearing those howls drawing steadily closer. The wolves have learned to herd their prey, cutting off escape routes, driving victims toward waiting ambushes. They show a particular cunning in attacking those separated from groups, those who lag behind or who foolishly venture away from their companions. They are patient hunters, willing to trail potential prey for days, waiting for the moment of maximum vulnerability. And there are worse things still. Bats the size of eagles roost in the deep caves, emerging at dusk in clouds so thick they darken the sky. Their screeching is almost ultrasonic, painful to the ears, and some say it can drive men mad if heard for too long. They feed on whatever they can catch, small animals mostly, but they have been known to attack larger prey in swarms, dozens of them latching on with their needle teeth, draining blood until their victim collapses from blood loss. There are tales, whispered around campfires, of other creatures in the forest. Of shadow things that have no true form, that are felt rather than seen. Cold presences that follow travelers through the trees, that whisper in voices almost below the threshold of hearing, that reach out with fingers that aren't quite there to touch the minds of those who venture too deep into the darkness. Whether these are truly physical beings or manifestations of the forest's corruption, spirits given shape by the overwhelming evil that permeates the place, none can say with certainty. Some areas of the forest are said to be haunted by the ghosts of those who died there, travelers who lost their way, warriors who fell in ancient battles, even elves who succumbed to the shadow. These spirits are not benevolent. Trapped in the forest by the same corruption that poisons the land, they have gone mad over the centuries, and now they lead others astray, luring them into bogs and ravines, filling their minds with false visions and broken memories. The forest itself has become a creature in a sense, an entity with a will, or at least a tendency, toward malevolence. Trees will shift their positions overnight, or so it seems to those who wake to find that paths they marked carefully have vanished. Roots seem to reach up deliberately to trip the unwary. Branches creak and crack at the worst possible moments, alerting predators to the presence of prey. The forest wants to keep you, wants to add your bones to the countless others that lie moldering beneath the fallen leaves. There are places, dells and clearings, where the very air seems thick with enchantment. To enter such a place is to risk losing all sense of time and direction. Hours can pass like minutes, or minutes stretch into hours. The same landmarks appear again and again, no matter which direction you travel. The mind begins to play tricks, conjuring visions of feast tables or distant voices calling for help. Those who follow such phantoms are never seen again. In the southern reaches, nearest to Dal Guldur, the corruption manifests in even more grotesque forms. Here the trees themselves seem alive with malice, their trunks bearing faces that whisper curses, their branches writhing without wind. Here the ground is treacherous, solid earth giving way suddenly to hidden pits filled with thorns or foul water. Here lights flicker in the distance, corpse scandals, will-o'-wisps, leading the unwary to their doom. The elves have documented what they can, creating maps of spider nests and wolf territories, marking areas of particular danger. But the forest changes too quickly. The creatures migrate, new horrors emerge from the shadow. The maps are outdated almost as soon as they are drawn. All they can truly tell travelers is this: the entire forest is deadly, but some parts are more deadly than others, and those parts tend to be in the south and east, spreading slowly but inexorably north and west. For every shadow, a story of courage hides, but few survive to tell it. The bones scattered throughout Mirkwood represent thousands of such stories, tales of bravery and desperation, of last stands and failed escapes. Some fought well, selling their lives dearly, taking spiders and wolves with them into death. Others died without ever seeing what killed them, dragged into the darkness with only a short scream to mark their passing. And the creatures multiply. With each passing year, the spiders grow more numerous, the wolves more bold. The bats extend their range. The shadow things drift further north. The forest is becoming impassable, even for the elves who know it best. Soon, perhaps, it will be completely impenetrable, a vast dead zone in the heart of Middle-earth, a realm where only the servants of darkness can dwell. This is Mirkwood's terrible glory, that it has become a realm of pure terror, a testing ground where courage is measured against primal fear, where every step might be your last, where the very earth and air have turned against all living things that do not serve the shadow. The creatures of darkness have claimed this realm, and they do not share. To walk the paths of Mirkwood is to step into legend and nightmare entwined. The forest does not reveal itself willingly. It guards its secrets behind walls of shadow and thorn, behind webs and watching eyes. Those who must traverse its length, and there are some, driven by necessity or desperation, learn quickly that in this place, the path itself is as much an enemy as any creature lurking in the undergrowth. There was once a road. An ancient road built in the elder days, when the forest was still green and fair. The elves constructed it with their characteristic skill, laying stones so perfectly fitted that grass grew between them, creating a path that was part of the landscape rather than a scar across it. This road ran from the northern reaches of the forest, near the elven realm, all the way south to the edge of the woods, providing safe passage for traders and travelers, for those who had business in both the north and the lands beyond the forest's borders. That road still exists, technically. The stones remain, buried now beneath decades of fallen leaves and encroaching undergrowth. But the path is no longer safe. In places, it vanishes entirely, swallowed by the forest's advance. In others, it leads directly through spider territories or passes so close to wolf dens that to follow it is certain death. The enchanted stream crosses it at a point where the bridge has long since rotted away, and to drink from that stream, even to touch its waters, is to fall into a sleep from which few wake, and those who do find that days or weeks have passed in what seemed like moments. The elves no longer maintain this road. They cannot spare the forces needed to keep it clear, and they have learned that some costs are too high to pay. So the old forest road, as it came to be known, has become a trap, a path that promises safety but delivers only illusion and death. Those who follow it, thinking it will guide them true, often find themselves hopelessly lost. For the road itself seems to shift and change, to lead in circles, to dead ends, to places where it simply stops without explanation. There is another route, known to a few. The elf path, narrow and hard to follow even in daylight, and there is no daylight beneath Mirkwood's canopy. This path winds through the northern forest, passing through the safest areas, avoiding the worst of the spider nests and wolf territories. But safe is a relative term in Mirkwood. Even on the elf path, vigilance must be constant, and travel is slow, for the path is treacherous, crossing ravines on fallen logs, climbing over enormous roots, disappearing entirely in places where one must simply trust to instinct and memory. The elves use this path for their patrols, and occasionally they will guide favored allies along it, though such favor is rarely given and never without price. To travel the elf path with elven guides is perhaps the safest way to cross the forest, but it is still no guarantee of survival. The elves themselves fall victim to the forest's horrors with grim regularity. For those without elven guidance, the forest offers no easy passage. Every step must be weighed, every decision calculated. The underbrush grows so thick in places that progress is measured in yards per hour, hacking through vines and thorns that claw at clothes and skin. The ground is treacherous. What appears to be solid earth may be a thin crust over a bog that will swallow a man before he can cry out. Deadfalls and pits, both natural and deliberately created by the forest's darker inhabitants, lie concealed beneath innocent-looking layers of leaves. And always the sensation of being watched, of eyes following every movement, of patient predators tracking your progress, calculating the perfect moment to strike. The forest is never silent. It rustles and creaks, whispers and groans. But these sounds offer no comfort. Each one might be the wind, or it might be something massive shifting its weight, preparing to pounce. The darkness itself is disorienting. Without sun or stars to navigate by, without any clear sense of direction, travelers quickly become lost. The trees all look the same in the gloom, vast trunks disappearing into the shadowed canopy, roots like grasping fingers, the ever-present undergrowth closing in from all sides. What landmarks exist are subtle: a particular shape of trunk, a formation of rocks, a depression in the ground, and easily missed by eyes that have not spent centuries learning to read the forest's secrets. Time behaves strangely in Mirkwood. Perhaps it is an effect of the constant twilight, the lack of natural markers for days' progression. Perhaps it is something more sinister, a side effect of the enchantments that poison the air. But travelers report losing track of hours and days, feeling as though they have walked forever while the forest remains unchanged, or crossing what seems like miles of terrain only to find themselves back where they started, recognizing trees they passed hours before. The forest river, that great waterway that cuts through the woodland, offers a potential route, but one fraught with its own dangers. To travel by boat might seem safer than walking the paths, as it allows one to avoid ground-based predators and move more quickly through the forest. But the river has changed along with everything else. Its waters run dark and swift, and strange things dwell beneath the surface. Fish grown huge and aggressive in the corrupted stream, other creatures whose shapes are only glimpsed in the moment before they drag their prey under the surface. The river also provides a highway for the forest's creatures. Spiders string webs across the water at narrow points, creating barriers that boats cannot pass without becoming entangled. Wolves prowl the banks, pacing alongside vessels, waiting for them to come ashore. And the sound of the river's rushing drowns out the small noises that might otherwise provide warning of approaching danger. There was once an enchanted stream that flowed through the forest, fed by a magical spring. Its waters were said to bring deep sleep to any who drank from them, not a malicious enchantment originally, but something of a blessing, a way to rest without fear in the heart of the wild. But the shadow has twisted even this magic. Now the sleep brought on by the stream's waters is not restful but death-like, filled with nightmares, and those who wake from it, if they wake, find themselves weakened and disoriented, easy prey for the forest's hunters. When Bilbo Baggins and the dwarves made their journey through Mirkwood, Following the old forest road, they discovered these truths firsthand. Despite all warnings, despite desperate attempts to remain on the path, they found themselves hopelessly lost within days. The darkness pressed in on them, smothering hope and reason alike. They wandered in circles, their supplies dwindling, their strength failing. The spiders found them, of course. In the deep forest, separated from the road, the company was attacked and captured, all save Bilbo, who used his ring of invisibility to mount a desperate rescue. The spiders had wrapped his companions in silk, hanging them from trees like provisions in a larder, discussing in their clicking language which should be eaten first. It was only through tremendous luck and Bilbo's unexpected courage that any of the company survived. And then came the encounter with the Wood Elves, the imprisonment in Thranduil's halls, the escape in barrels down the forest river. The dwarves learned what many before them had discovered, that sometimes the greatest danger in Mirkwood is not the creatures that want to kill you, but the simple impossibility of the terrain itself, the labyrinthine confusion that turns every path into a trap. Every step may be your last, and every path hides a watcher unseen. This is the truth of traveling in Mirkwood. There are no safe routes, no guaranteed passages. The forest has become a barrier more effective than any wall, dividing the north from the south, isolating the elven realm, creating a vast no-man's land in the heart of Middle-earth. Thus ends part one of our journey through Mirkwood, its shadows deep and its dangers many, but the tale continues in part two, where the forest's darkness and its hidden horrors await.